Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Wildflowers. It's Daisy here,
Hey guys, it's Sophie.
and we're excited to chat today. We're going to have a conversation, and we're going to see where this goes. I'll just start by asking, how are you doing today, Sophie?
I feel like I've been dealing honestly with a lot of self-judgment the past few weeks. It's something I've been thinking a lot about.
What would you define as self-judgment?
Self-judgment to me is like constant analytical thought in my head that I have about myself that feels so real that to the point where I can't separate, is that reality or is that just in my head?
What kind of instances does this come up in?
Literally, like, I'll go to record the podcast and I'm like already judging, like, oh, how are people going to want to listen? What are they? There's so much pressure that always just comes up in life.
I think it's a real thing where self-judgment can get in the way of you actually trying to do anything. I think that's like a super relatable thing because the self-judgments start and they start to take control over you to the point where you get paralyzed.
Yeah.
Would you describe that that's what happens?
Yeah, well, it's almost
Mentally or emotionally paralyzed?
it's like a combination of both. It's like you don't, like I said, it feels like you can't even separate between what you're actually thinking and what's actually happening. Like, for example, I recently started posting the TikToks that I was posting on my TikTok to Instagram, and I was like, okay, I'm going to post them on my personal Instagram because I kind of want to like share that. But I'm like, okay, all the people from high school follow me, from college. Automatically, I'm like hearing in my head like, oh, this is so bad. People are going to think this is so bad. It's like that vulnerability that comes up when you're trying to express yourself around certain types of people that you associate with judging you or who have judged you in the past. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but is it really just you judging yourself? Was anyone ever judging you in this moment?
I don't know. I think it's like the question of like sometimes I think back to past experiences I've had and wanting to know, was someone ever actually judging me or was it all in my head? It's kind of hard to separate those two.
Well, the way I view it, it's like since you specifically said like high school people follow you on Instagram, you feel insecure about posting these things that are true to you, a vulnerable side of you that on TikTok you didn't engage with. But something about high school particularly, it sounds like I envisioned you like just like going back to high school, and I'm like thinking of you being in your high school, and I'm wondering, it's like, was anyone ever judging you? Or were you always judging yourself because you didn't fit into what everyone else was doing? I always wonder because I think a lot of people always have these instances where they have experiences when they're in high school or when they're in college or wherever it is where they're like, yeah, I have all this insecurity. And it's like, did anyone ever say anything to you or were you always just judging yourself? My point in saying this is because like I think we don't necessarily give enough weight to ourselves and the judgments that we create for ourselves, our own brain creates for ourselves versus actually putting it on other people who are judging us. It's always us. I think it's like the kind of thing, it's always us who is judging. I think it's like the uncomfortability with ourselves. I'm not sure what it is, but I think it's the point is like it's no matter what experiences were happening, I think it's like you are the one who's always judging yourself. You are in control of not judging yourself also.
That's so interesting because it's like, let's like a hypothetical speaking. Somebody says something bad about you, right? You then internalize that to think, okay, I'm a bad person. Like if somebody says like Daisy sucks, you read that message, whatever, and then you're like, okay, I suck. What is the gap between the actual insult or comment or anything that someone in society says about you, the space, and then the way that we internalize it? Because I wonder like if there's a space, and there is definitely a space between the comment and one that turned into a judgment, but it doesn't feel like there's even space. And lately I've been thinking a lot about like, why are we so caught up in self-judgment? And a lot of it is because we think what people are saying is true. Like we think that what they're saying is true, and therefore we think that it implicates our value, when in reality we are whole and complete exactly as we are right now, but it doesn't feel that way when you experience these feelings.
Well, my first question is, does someone's comment about you sucking only suck if you believe that you suck?
Interesting. Wait, do you mean like if somebody says that like you're the worst?
Yeah.
Can that in and of itself be factual, or does like you believing it make it factual? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like if you already have like that insecurity yourself,
Right.
Versus if you've had that insecurity and you realize that that's just an expression, that's just a feeling, or that's just like a way to explain something. That's not how, no one sucks. Like no one is that. My point is being that like if you allow someone to have that power over you of saying you are this or you are that, then they're going to. But there's also a level of knowing like this person is no different than me. And I know that's not true about myself. So I think high school is interesting because that's a particular time where you might not have that confidence. You might not have the experience with life to know that that's not true. So it's just interesting that like it goes back to high school because I think that is a particularly vulnerable time for people.
Yeah. I mean, high school, like, I think back personally, high school definitely affected me a lot. And I've had these recognitions later on in life of realizing, like, whoa, like, these experiences that you can have at a young age, like 13, 14, 15, can really implicate who you are later in life. And it's almost like life is so weird. Like, we're in high school, and then before you know it, you're in your 20s and you're almost in your 30s. And it's kind of like, did you ever have time to really reflect on all these experiences that have happened to you in your life that are now implicating the way that you view yourself in the world and that you approach the world? It's like the whole thing. If I remember so vividly someone saying like one mean thing to me when I was like 12, and to this day, it implicates the way that I act in the world. And that is because we've internalized it so deeply as factual. We've internalized these things so deeply to be true. And it's not until that you can really stop and question them to say, wait, are these true? But again, it's like it's really hard to find that space to know that it's even an option that you could question the validity of the statement or the thought.
That's interesting of what you said about like some things are deeper than others. There's gonna be days where really simple things like make you feel judged, like, oh, like my shoelace keeps coming untied. Like everyone's looking at me when I bend down to tie my shoelace. But like that could just be because like you might be feeling insecure that day or something that's super shallow. Yeah. Where it doesn't come up much. But there's other things that are going to be like deeper ingrained that like you experienced at a younger age, or they're more deeply ingrained, so they're going to continue to reoccur.
Yeah.
I think it's possible to have like really shallow things and really deep things when it comes to self-judgment. And I think you can learn from both of them, because I think when it's really shallow, you realize like how easy you can change your mind around it, that you can start to utilize like with more deeply ingrained things, such as, you know, someone said you look weird in high school, and that really stuck with you. And I think that it can feel like you can't change those judgments, but I think it gonna consistent being aware of like, oh, I'm having this judgment, it's separate from me as a person. Like looking back to like 16-year-old me, like thought that was full truth about me. But I think you said this the other day, like you see the separation between who you are now and the person who believed this was fully true.
Well, I think it could be really hard to kind of merge who you are in your later life with the old version of yourself, in the sense of like all these thoughts and feelings you used to have as a younger person. I, think back to when you're in high school, like, oh, I feel like a loser. I feel like I don't know how to dress. I feel like nobody likes me. These narratives we create about ourselves that keep on going. And it's like you kind of see them in a macro and micro level. Like, for example, sometimes when I like go to get dressed for the day, I get so angry because I feel like I don't know what to wear. In reality, I don't really care that much about what I'm wearing, but there's like this trigger for me about, I think like when I was in high school, like someone like made a comment about what I was wearing or something, and deep-seated feeling of feeling like I'm not worthy or I'm not good enough. And it's like I don't feel that way right now, but it's almost like you try to like be the certain person of like, you grow and you turn into like, I've definitely feel like I've turned into more of a confident person than I used to be. But then when I think back to these like kind of who I was years ago, and in terms of my confidence, it's like those things don't even mesh. Like they don't make sense. So I think that is why it's kind of so hard to get rid of these judgments and errors we have about ourselves, because it's almost like that part of our life existed so strongly, or those moments felt so strongly that it's hard to imagine that like now you're not that way.
They become a core part of how you perceive yourself. You start to identify with these negative experiences so much that you don't even realize that you don't have to. So I think that's part of the battle, is knowing that, the judgments are never going to go away, but like they can get quieter. It's funny because it's all about how you're perceiving everything, right? Because some mornings, like you can wake up and you feel the light hitting your face, you hear the birds chirping, and it's the same bed that you could have woken up in last Saturday where the alarm was going off at 7 a.m. and like you had to rush to get to a train that was leaving. And it's everything around you is the exact same, but the way that you're experiencing that moment is different because of your internal experience. Or even, you know, like maybe you could be waking up like without the alarm or without this. You'd be waking up at the same time, exact same time of day. And based off how you're feeling, how you're thinking about the experiences you've had in the past 24 hours, you may feel weighed down or you may feel like really light in like the other example. Like, I just think it's interesting and it's important to point this out that like everything that you say is a part of you, like identifying with these certain particular judgments, they're not you. You are aware of them, so you can change the way that they impact how you perceive everything. But it's not easy. It can be like painful, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think I think so much of it is like you just said, like our reality is our thoughts. Our thoughts are our reality. Every single thing, like right now, like I'm perceiving you, we're recording this podcast. I could be having my own reality in my head about how well it's going or if it's going well. Or if you go on a date, anything you do, it's experiencing it through your experience, right? So you wake up one day in the same bed, the same apartment, the same city, it feels like the worst day of your life. You wake up in the same exact place, it's the best day of your life. Why such a drastic shift? And I think a lot of it comes down to like resistance of the feelings we're feeling, because on the line of judgment, it's like, okay, if you wake up and you're like, I don't feel as good as I felt yesterday. Like it's this constant comparing of like, I do this so often of, I don't feel as good as I felt yesterday. Today, for example, I felt pretty tired and not great. And I'm like, wait, why do I feel this way? Something's wrong with me. Now I feel a little anxious. I'm anxious about being anxious. What's wrong? Like, it's like, and the reality of it is like nothing's wrong. Like nothing is ever wrong, ever. But for some reason, we constantly judge and we constantly want to analyze how we're feeling. And it's that analysis that perpetuates the suffering, perpetuates the judgment, because we're judging how we are feeling in the moment.
Right. Which instantly takes you out of
the moment.
Yeah, I relate to that a lot. Because I feel like everyone can relate. There's moments that you're like, I have so much clarity right now. I feel so good. And a lot of the times the goal is to like, I always want to feel this good. And the irony is that like, as soon as you're chasing that feeling of good, you're not going to get it, because feeling that way, it's kind of serendipitous. It's like you just all of a sudden are just, you're living in the moment and you're like, damn, this feels really good. But as soon as you're searching for that feeling and not just searching for the moment, because a lot of the times, like, you know, you may be upset that someone like pushed you on the subway or something. Like, I'm sure there's something usually deeper going on if that upsets you. But the unwillingness to be present with that feeling causes, it steals the happiness in those joyful moments from you. Because if you're not feeling the bad, you can't feel the good. And I think that's a huge misconception. And I feel like that's something that I'm really aware of. Like, I'm aware of this, but like every week I feel like I go through this where I'm like, oh, like I just want to feel good right now. But it's like, I'm not being in this moment because I'm afraid to feel what I need to feel.
Why are we so scared to feel? Well, obviously I think in a larger societal realm, like you think back to when you're younger, and I was thinking about this the other day, it's like, oh, don't cry. Like, don't cry. Like, don't, like, I remember just being comforted. And, oh, you're sad. Like, there's a lot of sympathy with these quote unquote negative emotions. And I wonder if we say you just got dropped on earth, you've never been here before, you feel this feeling that we have now associated with sadness. Would you think it was bad, or would you just think that's another feeling I'm feeling?
That's a really good question. It's basically saying like, if someone wasn't conditioned through our society to like how we have been raised to say, don't cry, don't do this, everything's fine. And if someone was feeling sad or angry, I'm so curious on how they would react in a raw, unconditioned manner. You have to wonder, like, when the first humans were on Earth, like when they would feel angry, when they would feel sad, what the lifespan of that would be.
Because emotion.
Because you know, like, it's like what, 60 seconds or something like a minute or something like 2 minutes where you've actually have that lifespan of that emotion, but it gets trapped in our body because of we can't work through it. We don't allow ourselves to work through it. I'm so curious to know if the first humans, if it actually only lasted, you know, the minute to 2 minutes that it serves you to like change your disposition so that you can not die.
But I think a lot of
Get your needs met, whatever that is.
Oh, I think a lot of the studies that talk about like the half-life of emotion show that like the feeling of sadness arises and it only lasts longer than the half-life of it because we hold on to it, because we want to grasp it. Like there's so much clinging that we do for our emotions. And I started like really focusing on this like a year ago when I would like stub my toe or I was making dinner and like something fell and it's like, and I noticed myself like wanting to react, wanting to get really angry. And it's almost as if like I feel like I feel like like I have experienced being addicted to negativity, the negative bias. We are more prone to want to think negatively because it feels good, it feels comfortable. And I've noticed it so much with like someone pushing me on the subway. Why is it that some days that doesn't bother me, but then other days I'm like, oh my God, this day's over. Like I'm so mad. So I think that the fact that you could stub your toe and one day it might ruin your day, but the next day it might not be as bad, just goes to show again that our external environments are not what's causing how we're feeling. Like it's and then we try to manipulate our external environments to try to be like, okay, then if I can change this person, if I can control this, or if I can try to get in this relationship, or if I can do all these things, then finally like I'll be able to control my internal state, when in reality the whole time the only thing you could control was your internal state, but you've been looking the wrong thing to control it.
Totally. And we talk about the idea of like good pain.
Yeah.
And good pain like ultimately is necessary to get to like joy.
So what would you describe as good pain to you?
Going directly with resistance, not resisting. Like for example, for me, how I resist a podcast sometimes, even though I know it feels really good, the reason I resist it is because I know I have to connect with myself. And to connect with myself, I have to make myself vulnerable and I have to put myself out there, or I'm not even putting it out there. It's all internal for me. It's like I have to actually feel what I'm feeling. And while that will only take a few minutes for me to accept that, I'm taking accountability for how I'm feeling. And I don't want to do that. But when we do this, it's like, of course I have to, because it's a vulnerable conversation. So for me, I was like, okay, I realized I'm not going to feel good for a few minutes. Like I'm not going to resist this though. And then I come out and I'm like, this feels so good. It feels great to express and communicate. And it's really easy to get set into day-to-day ways where you're resisting all feelings and then you don't feel anything and you're numb. I remember like the first time I learned about this in high school, I was watching, of course, the Brene Brown like first like video about vulnerability and how like she researched it. Basically was saying like what we tend to do as Americans is that we are addicted to everything, whether it's sugar, alcohol, drugs. You know, it becomes an everyday occurrence that we don't see as an addiction. But as long as we're numbing out through these things that take the edge off, we're not feeling the extent of the pain that we need to in order to feel joy. Without these things, we're not going to feel the positive things. You can't have joy without suffering. Right. And I try to remind myself that every day because it's complicated, but it's really not. I think it's like going to the gym every day, working your emotions every day. Like, am I checking in? Am I resisting checking in? Am I resisting working? Am I resisting like doing a task I need to do? Do it and test yourself that way.
It's interesting you bring up working because I've experienced so much with working. When I first started working, so much anxiety would come over me when I got an assignment, I got a task, and I would get so nervous, like this crippling anxiety. And I so vividly like can feel what that feels like. It's like the anxiety, you experience anxiety, you start noticing that you're feeling anxious. I start doubting myself. I start thinking like, I'm not gonna be able to do this task. I'm not gonna be able to get this done. I'm gonna be working all night. And then it was never even the task. It was never the project. It was never any of that. It was the fact that I was now starting to associate that this was going to cause me to suffer, that this project was going to cause me to suffer. Throughout time, I started to really recognize that, okay, wait, is it really the thing I have to do, or is it me? Why does this feeling keep coming up? Why is it so consistent? And that's a good thing sometimes about noticing the consistency in our emotions is that you can recognize your patterns. You can recognize that, okay, every single time your boss gives you a task, you experience anxiety every time. But how come, your coworker doesn't feel that way, or your girlfriend doesn't feel that way? If your girlfriend or boyfriend was in the same position, like they might not react to that way. A lot of it has to do with the way that we are perceiving this experience. I'm perceiving that feeling that I felt of anxiety be bad. I'm like, I should not be feeling this way. I should not be feeling stressed. I should not be feeling all these feelings. But then that is a reason why I feel so bad at work.
Right, because you're telling yourself, this should not be how I'm feeling. I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't be doing that. And in those moments, you're neglecting yourself the ability to actually work through what you're feeling, because you feel shame around feeling these things. You're judging yourself, taking it back to judgment. Like, of course, if you're in a state of judgment, you're like in a state of not giving yourself self-compassion. You would never like see someone who's hysterically crying on the street, which isn't that odd in New York, honestly. I've seen it so many times. You wouldn't go push them and be like, why are you feeling this way?
Yeah.
Which is what you're doing when you're feeling stress and saying like, why can't I just do this work assignment? That's only going to further push you to the edge. And it's because you're told that it's taboo to be feeling this way around things. And I think as long as that's taboo, am I saying that right? Taboo?
Taboo, I think.
You're going to neglect the compassion you need to give to yourself. And I don't think self-compassion is common. I think like we're kind of taught to not have self-compassion. At least I know I struggle with self-compassion. It's ultimately like you have to love yourself and say, there's a reason you're feeling this way. Like, let's investigate why you're feeling this way. Because this is not who you are. You aren't this anxious person who can't do an assignment.
You're not that, right?
Well, let's figure out like why I feel this way.
Right. It's so interesting. Like you brought the analogy or the reference of like, okay, you would never, if your friend was feeling this bad, you would never be like, oh, you loser, suck it up, right? Yeah. No, never. We would never talk to, or most people probably would not talk to other people the way that we have our own inner dialogue.
No way.
Our inner dialogue is so dangerous. The things that like you could say to yourself that you would never say to one of your friends. You would never say such like judgmental comments to your friends or your family. So why do you say it to yourself? And I think a lot of it is because we're almost not aware that we're talking to ourselves this way. We're not aware that we are judging ourselves. We're not aware that these thoughts actually are implicating the way that we perceive this world, the way that we feel. And it goes back to, like you said, self-compassion, understanding, self-love. Like when you're feeling so anxious, instead of running away from it, you say to yourself, like, no, I understand that. I see that. That's okay too. Like this belongs. And when you could practice that level of self-compassion, I think you start to notice that your relationship with these feelings that you're feeling, I don't think those feelings ever go away, but I think that your relationship with them does, and there too does your experience and reality change, and there too does your whole life change. It's like it's like a whole effect of how they all interact together.
Yeah, well, the goal isn't necessarily to get rid of them, but it's to create space between you and them to realize that you are not them. Like you're just experiencing these feelings.
I think the difficulty for me is when I have thoughts, sometimes I'll wake up and sometimes it's like influenced by how well I slept the night before. You know, sometimes it's like if I slept really well, I feel like I wake up, I feel really good, and it feels like my hormones really play a role in how much control I have over my thoughts. And again, the goal is not to have control over your thoughts, but it's almost like sometimes I can really start to see now that I will have experience, I'll have a thought, like I was meditating today and I was feeling really anxious, and I started to like really visualize this like guy sitting next to me who's really messy and writing and like freaking out kind of, and I literally like envision myself like patting him on the head and be like, it's okay, like it's okay, like, but in that moment I saw that anxiety separate from myself. I was not that anxiety. And I think this goes back to a lot of like how we always say like I am sad, like I am angry. We're attaching our experience with the emotion to be one of the two.
Interesting. I do want to push you a little bit on what you said about I have a harder time controlling my emotions when like I don't get enough sleep or hormonal reasons or whatever. And like, is that not to say like it's not real. It might be extra difficult, but you can still do it.
Yeah.
So it might be a little bit of a cop out to say like, oh, when I don't get enough sleep, like I can't handle my emotions. Like, while like I totally understand like it makes it more difficult, I think you definitely can.
I'm sure.
It's like the next level. Obviously it's more difficult, but
I'm sure. And I think like again, I thought about this recently. I'm like, do I actually feel worse when I don't get enough sleep? It's like I do, but it's like I've kind of stopped letting go of the narrative. I'm tired. Like, all right, I feel like I spent so much of my life feeling I'm tired.
Well, you're perpetuating that you're tired. You're clinging to it.
It's like, okay, great. I wake up, I'm experiencing what we've associated to mean tired, fatigue. then I'm either gonna sit there and I'm gonna linger over the fact I'm tired. I don't want to do this. Like I'm not gonna be able to do this because I'm tired. It's like you want to go to the gym and you're thinking about going to the gym, but you're envisioning in your head like it's almost like you envision in your head like getting to the gym, but feeling stuck there because you are tired.
Yeah.
Or you can say, okay, I'm tired. I'm gonna go. Okay, that's it. Move forward.
Well, I think it's like the example. It's like you are not your thoughts. Your thoughts lie to you. Your thoughts like almost aren't your friend, and you have to be able to tell your thoughts to shut up.
I have a lot of self-talk to myself.
You don't even realize it. How many thoughts do you like? 30,000 thoughts a day. What is it? Something
I think
crazy?
they haven't confirmed. They've done different studies, but it's something along the lines of like 60,000. How could you, if you have over 30,000?
Can you write down every thought you have tomorrow?
I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine writing down every thought I had.
Imagine how revealing that would be.
Right? If you wrote down every single thought you had and you could like look back.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of like for me, like journaling is that.
Yeah, it's a window into it.
But even when you journal.
The most pervasive thoughts.
Even when you journal and going back to vulnerability is when we are truly guards down. And that means you're not thinking about what you're doing, but you're doing it. Even when I sit down for journal sometimes, I'm like judging myself. And I look around like no one's here. Who am I judging?
Yeah.
I'm not judging. Like I'm judging myself.
Yeah.
And that's why I go back to self-judgment. Self-judgment doesn't even always happen when you're around other people. Self-judgment happens when you're alone. Like I really experience self-judgment sometimes when I'm like journaling certain things. I'm like, I shouldn't think that. I shouldn't feel that way.
What's the difference between resistance and self-judgment? Because it kind of sounds the same.
I don't know, because resistance is not wanting to experience or feel a certain feeling. I guess self-judgment, they're kind of interlocked.
Yeah, because it's like if you are allowing yourself to be like, I'm judging myself for coloring in a coloring book, but I also know I want to do it.
Yeah, there's like this, like
there's some kind of connection that I can't put my finger on.
There's like kind of this like this interaction between the two of them where, yeah, I think self-judgment is you thinking that what you're feeling is not, that you should not be feeling it. Therefore, that in and of itself, you are resisting the feeling. So in order to judge, you have to resist, right?
When you realize you're resisting, like, what do you do? Sometimes like you snap out of it. You're like, what?
Me personally?
Just in general.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I know I do. Like, I'll like be aware of like, okay, I'm resisting doing this podcast because I don't want to face myself. I'm disconnected from myself. And in order to do this, I have to connect with myself. It's like, okay. Like have a long view. Don't have like a short view of like what you're experiencing now. I don't know. I think that it's like something that is so widespread and felt so often that it's easy to not be aware of it.
Take it one step at a time. Like we so often want to forecast so far into the future, and that's where a lot of our resistance comes from. That's why we feel stuck, because of course when you're thinking about how something's going to play out in the next 6 months, you're going to feel a little crippled by it because we can't comprehend what's going to happen. That hasn't happened yet. But if you say, okay, literally all that exists is this moment, that's all I have. Really, if you just let go and you just say to yourself, I accept, and then you start going on with your day, it's like before you know it, it's 6 p.m. You're like, was I anxious earlier? You forget.
Yeah,
because
it's so freeing. Because
you have allowed yourself to be there. You've allowed yourself to enjoy the day. And I think it's like every day is a constant battle of enjoying the day. But pushing yourself to enjoy the day means that you're just going to allow yourself to be there.
Like for me particularly, like whenever I am thinking about resistance or like detachment from myself, like I always like feel things in my stomach. And I always start to feel warm in my stomach, like when I know that I'm like on the right path of like trying to accept whatever's happening in the moment. I feel like that's where I start to feel the shift happening of allowing myself to not resist. And it can be like a softening. I don't know. That's just me.
Softening with the moment?
Yeah, like softening like with the self. Stopping, like I think like when I think of like resisting yourself, I think of like you're fighting yourself. Isn't that silly to think of like you like within your body who's creating your thoughts, who's making the sounds that come out of your mouth to communicate, that create the body movements that people read while connecting? Isn't it funny to think like if your body, your physical just body is like fighting with the person who's controlling all of that, which is also you're gonna look so bizarre. Like you're not gonna function like your full capabilities. You're really not going to. And I think when you paint that picture that most people do that every day, like you're like fighting your internal thoughts and you're not working with yourself because mind is just going over and over and over on things, like, and we get trapped in these feelings and it causes us to have these like longer fights with yourself. Imagine like what that, if you're fighting with yourself, like what kind of interactions are you going to have with people?
Definitely. Well, when you're fighting with yourself, you're kind of fighting with the rest of the world. But I think it's important, like what I had read, started reading in the Power of Now book by Eckhart Tolle. Is it Eckhart Tolle or Tolle?
I think. I've heard both.
He said, and when I started it, that he went through major depression. He was suffering. And then we could talk more about this on the podcast as we read the book.
Right.
But what he realized that he said one day is like, I hate myself. And then he was like, wait. If I hate myself, there must be separation between I and the self. And that's what kind of woke him up.
Oh, interesting.
Of like, if you hate yourself and you are not this self person you've created, this story, this narrative you created about yourself dating back to, like we're talking about high school, that is not you.
There is separation between I and the self.
And the self.
What does that mean?
There was like, in the book, there was like a pause thing to think about it after.
What did you think about?
I think I was just like, that makes a lot of sense. I want to understand better, but I think what he's trying to probably say is that like, we have these thoughts, we have these judgments about ourselves, but if we're able to recognize them, then clearly those are not who you are. Those are just experiences that we have. Like the same thing as when you're meditating and you hear the car siren. Those thoughts you have are existing in the same sphere as the sirens. They are of things you observe. And you can kind of feel sometimes when you're thinking, like, I know there's two voices, right? Like, wouldn't you say there's two voices? Like, in the sense of, like, there's a part of you that, like, knows that this is who you are and that you love yourself. And there's a part of you who hates yourself.
Yeah.
And,
well, I think that's, like, this has been told throughout time, the ages of time, of like, you have the two wolves, which one will you feed? You have the devil, you have the angel on your shoulders. It's like, which one will you listen to? It's like, there's I think that's like a good imagery for like how there is two voices in your head. There is a separation between the self and, I don't even know, something else. Like, there is space between the thoughts and the self. I think that's really what I get from that is like, you are not your thoughts. You have all kinds of thoughts. You don't have just two wolves. You probably have so many more, but to sum it up, like into like good and bad.
Right. You're just experiencing those thoughts. You are not those thoughts.
Yeah, you're not, which is so freeing, but also it's hard to understand that there's a separation between those two.
I think when you think about some of the most illogical thoughts you can have, like, I can't even think of any right now, but you think something that is just so falsely false. Like, you know where our brain can go. You know where our imagination can go. And if our imagination can go so far, of course, so too can our thoughts, because in a way, these thoughts are kind of like the imagination.
Yeah.
And they're imagining this reality that doesn't exist. They are imagining that you are this loser, this ugly person that's awkward and that people are judging, but no one else is thinking those things, because that is the illusion in the reality that you're creating. But that is not the actual reality that you're experiencing, because the reality that you're experiencing is with your eyes and your senses that you have in this room. And when you quiet the thoughts, you realize that, whoa, that I've been living there. I've been living in that place when I could have been living here.
Right. Yeah. I mean, think of the crazy, like Harry Potter. Think about like all of the different imaginary stories and movies that our culture loves. Like these are totally made up. Someone created this idea of Hogwarts.
Yeah.
That they didn't see. Like, that came from someone's brain, came from someone's mind. Like, and that just shows, there's also like horror movies that are like, I hate horror movies, but like there are horror movies that are just so like icky. It's like, who came up with this? But it's like, I think that just shows like the depths of our mind you can create so many worlds within your mind.
So many.
And that's why like you can have so many different experiences. Going back to earlier, like you wake up in the same bed one day at the same time and you have totally different experience than the next day. Like,
I want to ask you though, so on the realm of some thoughts are not a reality. well, I guess like they kind of are a reality because you're still experiencing them, but they're not a
They're
reality.
not permanent.
They're not permanent. But I want to ask, like, do you feel like imagination, or do you think that dreams are reality?
Huh.
Like, do you think that the place that you go when you're dreaming is just as real as the place that you are when you're not dreaming?
You know,
And the question obviously goes back to like, are you always dreaming?
okay, well, the second question, I'm not there yet because I have to first understand
Hey,
what to
you
answer.
told me to push myself, so I'm gonna have you push yourself.
No, but if you think about it, like whatever are in your dreams, they're in your subconscious, which is what also drives you during the day. So what is the difference between when you're dreaming and when you're not, right? Like subconsciously, like mentally, like whatever you're dreaming about, it's coming from the same pond of what you're thinking about during the day when you're like walking around or awake. So the only difference is like that you're conscious when you're waking and you're unconscious when you're sleeping.
It's confusing.
When you're awake, you think you're making decisions for yourself. Like you think, like, quote unquote, like you think you're making decisions for yourself because you think you're making the conscious decision to have oatmeal for breakfast. Like, but when you're sleeping, you
This is a mind-boggling stuff.
No, it is, but I'm trying to understand, like when you are asleep, you are the same person than when you're awake. Like it's just I don't know. I'm trying to like put my finger on it. Like I know you want to talk, but I want to continue to try to understand.
No, I
like,
honestly don't have. I don't
okay,
know.
the difference between when you're awake and when you're sleeping is that like when you're sleeping, you literally are the same person. The only difference is that like your identity is kind of gone because you're not thinking about yourself when you're sleeping. You're only experiencing what's around you. You're literally not thinking about yourself. Tell me a dream that you were thinking, that you were having thoughts and judgments about yourself.
Imagine how amazing life would be if we weren't thinking about ourselves. Could we just replicate what it feels like to be in a dream in real life? That's really interesting you said that. I've never thought of it that way. But if when you're dreaming, you're purely experiencing
everything.
It's going through your mind. Like you're so immersed in this experience. But you're not sitting there worrying like, ugh, who's perceiving me now? I mean, sometimes maybe you have anxious dreams, but so much of the dreams feel like you're outside your body almost. You're immersed in this world. That's kind of the present moment. I mean, obviously, I don't think in the present moment I've had experiences yet where I could fly or do crazy shit that you do in your dreams or in movies. But it's the idea of like that in this ever-present state that you are in when you are dreaming. I don't know the technical terms, but I'm just saying from our experiences, obviously we're not like scientists or whatever. I don't know like REM, whatever, but I'm just saying the state that you are in when you're dreaming of experiencing these experiences, feeling so vivid and so real, you have to think like you're not dreaming and think about yourself. And this kind of ties up the whole conversation of like just the idea of like how much, it looks like you want to comment on it or you're confused, but I just want to say how much of the reasons why we suffer have to do with how much we think about ourselves.
Interesting.
And why we can't fully embrace the moments and why we feel resistance and why we struggle so much is because we are so caught up with ourselves.
So interesting.
And that goes back to the whole, okay, I hate myself. So
interesting.
If you're not yourself, then who's the I? Your I is the experience. So you are just the experience. It's kind of what it goes down to.
Yeah, you're getting in the way of experiencing things that you could be totally different experience.
And
what I was going to ask was, it feels like whenever I dream, I'm not dreaming about everyday things personally. There were like these random concoctions of like experiences I've never had. So like, where are those coming from? Like, what are you just getting closer to understanding what's in the subconscious? Because God knows, like, what is in your subconscious. Like, you can't access that on an everyday. It's just interesting because it seems like these thoughts that we perceive that are actually ourselves, they really do get in the way of us every single day. So much. Like, and it's so interesting. Like, your dreams are so vivid and you're so there. But you're not thinking about, I have to go make dinner. I have to get this assignment done.
There's so much in real life. There's so much I.
Why do you think? I'd be curious to see, like, outside of US, like we're in New York City specifically, like people are always thinking about the next moment. I'd be curious to know, like, what is the most present nation or the most present country? Like, what culture of people is going to be like the most present. And it's probably going to be, I mean, I don't know, honestly, but like what causes people to be present? What facilitates presence? And I know it's not capitalism because you're always like, I think it's kind of the opposite. You're always kind of thinking like, okay, my next paycheck, what am I going to buy? Granted, I think like it's also part of like human nature to like think about the next thing as like a survival tactic. But I do think certain things bring it out more. Maybe it's all an inner dialogue. It's all an inner challenge of saying like it, you know, I have to understand like what's going to keep me present. You can't really blame it on any situation around you because it's an inner thing. But I'm curious for people who it comes more natural to, like, how do they discover it? How do they find this level of presence? And a lot of people will say like, oh, it's hitting rock bottom, and it's knowing that I only things can only go up from here. And it's like kind of having those realizations like when you're like so miserable and suffering. I've heard that, but I'm curious other influences.
I don't know. I think it's interesting because we started the conversations off saying that every single thing that you experience is internal in terms of you create your reality. So it's like the question of when we got back from traveling in Austin for a month, we came back to New York City, and we were kind of like, at first I'm like, ugh, like, can I feel as good here? Can I feel as happy here? And I think a lot of that had to do with me thinking that New York City is why I don't feel good. And recently I've actually been feeling like pretty just as good as I felt there. What does that say? Okay, yes, there's sirens and all these amazingly hectic nature of New York City, but you could still find that peace that you've been looking for if you let yourself. And I think like you're saying, like we place so much blame and attribution to external factors that we lack accountability.
Yeah.
You said accountability earlier. We lack it.
Yeah.
And we blame and we blame and we blame. It's my coworker's fault. It's the city's fault. It's the taxi driver's fault.
Yeah.
It's this person's fault. It's like, no. It's none of those external things. And guess what? You cannot control any of those. So you might as well focus on the one thing that you can control, which is yourself.
You know why you are accountable? You have to be accountable for anything that happens to you, because the consequences are only going to affect you. No matter what happens to you, how painful something is, or like, you have to accept accountability for it, because if you don't, you're going to be the one that suffers. No one else is. It's your choice. Like you can decide like, oh, like I'm just going to stay stuck in this mindset because this is how it's always been. This is how it's always going to be. But if you do that, the consequence is that you're always going to feel how you have always felt, and you're going to have the same life you've always felt that you wanted to leave, but you can't because you're not taking accountability for how you're feeling, because change doesn't happen until you accept and you move on.
And also,
that's not easy.
I do want to say that, yes, while you are the one who's experiencing it in that moment, it does have a ripple effect onto the rest of society. That one interaction that you have with somebody when you go to the coffee store, if you're feeling shitty about yourself, you're judging yourself, you're probably going to project that onto that person, who's then that's going to implicate how they view the next person they talk to. It's a domino effect.
Or if like you have kids, or if you have a family and you're creating a certain energy in the family, like, totally. It does have with anyone you interact with. I agree with that. But you're the one who's going to be feeling that. Yeah. I mean, like you said it right. Like,
yeah, I think that like then that's why it's important to have these conversations, because the more that we become present with our emotions, the less that we will be projecting them onto other people, the less that we will be then implicating the way that people act in the world, who are just perpetuating our larger suffering on a larger scale. I just think that's what's really important.
So going back to what you said earlier of the difference between dreams and reality, maybe I said this, I don't know, is that you're thinking about yourself and getting in the way of having the pure experience of the moment. And it makes you wonder if the only thing that's separating you from the random person you're passing in the street are your thoughts of you. It's weird, because it's what separates you from yourself. Those thoughts separate you from yourself, but they also separate you from the person next. And what you said, like if you're having a bad day, you're gonna make sure that person next to you is having a bad day. But if you're having a good day, you want to share that with the person next to you.
You do.
So what does that mean?
Because we also, that's why people are mean to people, because you want them to feel the way you're feeling.
Yeah, but I'm curious about like what connects us and what divides us as like a society, or as a race of humans.
I think a lot of the disconnection, like it's on very micro levels of everybody feeling disconnected from themselves and perpetuating this idea that we're disconnected from other people too.
Right? I think the more you disconnect from yourself, of course, the difficulty is going to arise that you can't connect with others.
Of course.
The more connected you are with your true self. I mean, I think a lot of people, and like me as well, like it's much easier to disconnect from yourself and connect to like and cling to these other identities of like your job, like I have to get this job done, this is how much money I make and this is me, or like I'm a mom and this is what I do, like taking on like these roles
definitely
versus just like realizing I'm choosing this role. This role is not who you are.
You don't ever have to be a role.
No,
but we all choose to partake in them.
Why? Because it makes life easier, or does it?
Because I think we judge ourselves if we're not in them. A lot of it comes back to judgment. And that's kind of like, I don't know. I think that's kind of like, we started the conversation off, and I guess we can close the conversation off kind of just like the idea of like, a self-judgment is not good for us. It's not good for society. With that being said, it's really, really hard to understand that you have a choice. You don't need to judge yourself. You don't need to create these narratives about yourself. Nobody else is creating these narratives but you. And having self-compassion, having love for yourself to recognize that you have so much more potential than these thoughts are telling you, that this narrative is telling you. And once you accept those thoughts, you can kind of set yourself free from them. And that will lead you to a level of not like you're like start the journey again the next day, but you get to experience this idea of flow state and this level of acceptance where you realize nothing was ever wrong. Nothing was ever wrong. And it was never anyone else's fault.
Yeah.
It all came back to you. Yeah. And it always comes back to you.
It does. It does. And you're always going to be the one experiencing these things. And so if you want to experience only judging yourself and never having compassion for yourself, then that's how you're going to live your life. And it can be a really hard pill to swallow, to realize like, oh, I have to be nice to myself in order to make a difference in how I'm feeling. And I forget where I heard this, but I think it was either a doctor or a psychologist, they were talking about when you look at nature and you look at like, the birth of like a bird, the egg, it hatches, it becomes broken. It becomes soft. It becomes open. Like with that, life comes out of that and grows into an adult. And nothing in life can grow without vulnerability and trust. So if you don't have that with yourself, it's going to make it really difficult to move forward and change at all. If you're just only being really mean to yourself and not having vulnerability to realize, okay, like I can grow from this.
And letting those emotions take their course without interrupting them, because a lot of beauty can come from the most painful emotions, but only if you let them naturally take their course without resisting them, without judging them, without thinking there's anything wrong with them. And the more you practice it, it's a practice. The more you practice it, the more you observe it, the more that you become aware of it, you slowly start to recognize that, whoa, that's kind of what freedom looks like. And you could get there. It's just a matter of constantly trying to catch yourself and coming back to being here.
Yeah. And I think we all judge ourselves based off that we're going to take a test. We're taking a test right now. And this is the only time you're ever going to take this test. And if you don't pass, you're going to fail. I feel like that's like the kind of pressure we're under, like when we're like talking and thinking about judgment of like, oh, like I just met that person, my introduction, it wasn't great. I'm never going to, that's all. Yeah. And that's it. And I think with that mentality, like it's more difficult to allow yourself the chance to learn and reflect and move on. Because if you're being too hard on yourself, like you're not going to be vulnerable and open to feedback, to change and grow and do it differently next time. And I think it's really easy to be really hard on yourself. Like
we can talk about another episode, like why, like dissecting these feelings, like you said, you get after interactions with other people, the fact that we let it weigh so heavily in our life. We think that one experience can quite literally ruin your life, which is false because your life is always happening here and now, and it's always happening. Like it's not possible, but yes, that feels so real in those moments. That's always something interesting we could talk about in another episode.
I can tell you're ready to tie this episode up.
Well, no, I think that like self-judgment is real. I think that I've experienced it a lot, but recently I've been really trying to think about the validity we give to our judgment is us doubting our truthful nature, that we are whole and complete in the way we are. If you know that no matter what happens, you are always whole and complete, you are always in the state that you need to be, you're always able to love, you're always able to feel this compassion for yourself. If you know that's always there, you kind of, nothing can break through that. And I think as long as you
even anger.
Well, I think that anger, you start to realize that like anger is just emotion I'm experiencing, but anger does not define me. Anger does not define this whole and complete nature that I already am.
But how do you find the present moment when you're like fully in an emotion, like feeling like, for example, like if you're feeling sad, you cry. If you're feeling angry, what do you do?
But okay, that's a good question.
To move through that emotion. You can't just go punch someone.
Then I think you maybe let yourself, if it's warranted, I don't know. I think like maybe if you feel frustrated, you go work out, you release. And then what happens after you work out? You feel a little bit better. I think it's not about never feeling angry, but it's about allowing yourself to feel angry. I don't know. I haven't thought much about anger. It feels different because it's like, do you want to act on that?
No,
that's dangerous.
Yeah.
So while I think you have to,
because I think with a lot of judgment, you can start to get angry at yourself. Is why I asked that.
I think again, it's like, right, like when you're sad, you can cry, but I think when you're angry, you have to just recognize like, okay, I think anger, it's like, what is wrong here? Because anger, a lot of time anger comes back to feeling hurt.
Yeah.
And then you cry. I think I read somewhere once that anger is like, it is related to sadness because we are angry because we are hurt about something. Anger is just like the next level of response emotion. So it's like if you don't act on sadness, you probably get angry after. I think a lot of the reasons we feel sad, I can think about when I felt angry because I feel hurt. Like I feel so angry at them. I feel so mad at my parents or something like that because I feel hurt. But we mask it with anger, I think, a lot of time because that feels less vulnerable. Anger feels less vulnerable than being sad, if you think about it.
Or I think it's like anger comes like when like something has been so consistent that it's like you're saying, it's like layered. Like you have sadness and then like you have anger.
Right.
Something for us to think about.
Something for us to think about. We can talk about this. But yeah, anything you want to say as we close out?
No, I think that it's so important to have these conversations because as we have these like 70,000 thoughts a day or whatever, something crazy a number, like it's important. Fact check that. It's important to really focus on those thoughts that you do want to have by talking about it, listening to conversations about it. Because you can't just have those with yourself. You have to actively do things. I think that's kind of like you can't just rely on having these thoughts and being like, okay, I'm only going to have these positive thoughts. Like, that's not really, like, no one wants to just only have certain thoughts. It's not realistic, but it's like taking certain actions or like listening to certain things or like being with certain people who like help center these thoughts so that you have more of these thoughts. Like, I'm just excited to be talking about these kinds of things because I know that it's something that I've always craved, but for some reason I've never acted on it. But I think it can be like, it's kind of taboo in a way sometimes, like not really anymore. It's messy to like think about the workings of like the human psyche with emotions.
Definitely.
It's something that you can just honestly talk about forever. And that's why we're here.
It's
just to talk about things.
Just to talk, just express what we're going through to help you guys, whatever you're going through, because ultimately we are all kind of experiencing this global, like we're all experiencing the same emotions because we are all connected. We're all interconnected. We are experiencing this life like together.
Yeah.
In the same consciousness. So what we're feeling, you guys are feeling, and that's how we're going to keep working through these things, talking about it, questioning things, because it helps us grow, but it also hopefully helps everyone else grow. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. It's been so great to talk about this, and we really, really are so excited. So thank you so much for listening this far, for supporting us, and we're excited to talk to you guys soon.
Thanks for listening to us, and we are looking forward to continuing this conversation and talking more.